Hi, I'm Trishla from TIFA Working Studios, and I'm going to be opening the session today. The session today is on what is basic income, a transformational society. So we're going to discuss the topic today. Just to give you more details, in the chat section below, there is the full introduction of the session. I'll be introducing it very quickly right now. What is basic income? An income paid unconditionally to individuals regardless of their family or household relationships, regardless of their other incomes, and regardless of their past, present, and future employment status. With the world amidst the COVID crisis, the social and economic disruptions have made governments take measures to handle this issue. The idea of basic income has been around for a long time, but in recent years, it has moved of political discussion into the mainstream. It is simple that this social policy represents a humane way of ensuring everyone has enough income to get by during the crisis. Even in normal times, basic income is being increasingly recognized as a policy that provides a ground on which people can stand and build their lives. This is the gist of the session that we'll be covering today. And we will go over this with two of our speakers, Toby, Lloyd, and Sarath. TIFA Working Studios, who's organizing this in collaboration with CASP, which is Council for Arts and Social Practice. TIFA Working Studios is a multidisciplinary platform for creativity and culture. And this is our second webinar, and we've also pivoted to working online since our physical space has been shut due to the lockdown in India. Just to go over some hygiene rules to make the session as smooth as possible, and just to introduce some of you who might not be familiar with the Zoom interface, there is a chat box on the bottom, which will have all the introductions of the session, as well as the organizations, as well as the speakers, which will be posted. This is also the section in which you can ask questions during the session if you have any. And the questions will be taken verbally by our moderator, Amrita, who's going to be introducing CASP soon. We request all of the participants to please mute their microphones and also to turn off their video so that there are no distractions during the session. So whoever has their video on, we please recommend that you turn on your video for the smoothest flow possible. Another pointer is that the flow of the event is such that I will speak and then Amrita will speak from CASP, also introducing our speakers. Then Toby, we'll also have questions that you can direct to Toby after Toby's session, after which we'll have Sarath and questions to Sarath. After that, we'll have a short joint panel of both of them. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat section, and that's how we'll go forward. We're really thrilled to do our first webinar, and this is our third year working with CASP together. So I'll just invite Amrita to come on board and introduce CASP and take the session forward. Thank you, Amrita.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, organized by the Council of Arts and Social Practice in collaboration with TIFA Working Studios. Thank you, TIFA, for coming on board for this. And just to quickly say to the audience that we had, in February 2020, we had organized a talk on basic income in the physical space at TIFA in Pune by Toby. And then after that, there were lots of responses where people wanted to know more about this, and that's how this webinar came up. And of course, within the context of COVID and all of that, it is the only thing that online spaces that makes sense, even if we want to, a different kind of dealing with the public. So I will quickly introduce CASP. CASP is a platform for transdisciplinary artistic research and practice to facilitate critical dialogues on cultural sustainability. It aims to integrate sustainable forms of thinking and practice by interconnecting landscapes, built environments, people, and everyday life. CASP formulates ideas of mutualism and facilitates meaningful public interactions through talks, community initiatives, and collaborative projects, fostering a relational engagement at both individual and institutional levels. Established in 2013, CASP works through 4 chapters in Navi Mumbai, Kolkata, Pune, and New Delhi. And as TIFA has mentioned, we have been collaborating with TIFA since 2016 for the conversation series, and it's been a very meaningful and valuable partnership. I will quickly now introduce our first speaker, Toby P. Lloyd. Toby is an artist currently undertaking a practice-based PhD in the Fine Art Department at Newcastle University, United Kingdom. His research examines public attitudes to work and the emancipatory effects universal basic income could have on society. He will present different interpretations of this policy and draw from his own PhD research and art projects along with the work of others involved in the movement in the United Kingdom. Welcome, Toby, and I invite you to start your presentation.
Hello, can you hear me? Great. So I'm just going to try and share my screen, get the presentation up. Let's see. Okay, hopefully you can see that now.
Toby, just 1 second before you jump in, for the audience members, if you aren't able to view the full screen of the presentation, just make sure you're on the speaker view, which should be on the option on your top right corner.
Okay.
You can go ahead, Toby.
Thank you very much. Okay, so hopefully that's yeah, hopefully the technology works. I was saying to Sarath earlier on how I've watched lots of these webinars since I've been in a physical isolation, and it feels very different being on this side of the camera. I'm going to try and look at the camera as much as possible, but I'm reading off another screen for my notes and things like that, so that's why I might look a bit strange. Okay, so first of all, I just wanted to say thank you very much to TIFA and CASP for hosting the webinar. I was living in Pune earlier this year, but had to return to the UK because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's great to see you all again, even if it is just in this virtual space. Okay, so before I start my presentation, I want to ask all of you 3 questions. So these are, so first of all, don't worry, you don't have to tell anyone your answers to these questions, but if you would like to respond to them, you can put that in the chat, or you can email me later. My details will be on at the end of the presentation. Just as a word of, I can't actually see the chat in the presentation mode I've got at the moment, and that's probably a good thing. I might find it distracting, but I'll try and respond to any questions at the end of the presentation. So yeah, so if you haven't read the questions already, the 3 questions are: what did you want to be when you were growing up? What gets you out of bed in the morning? And what would you do if you had a year off? These are up to you how you interpret them, I'd be very interested to hear your responses. So I got interested in basic income a few years ago because I had an experience on an artist residency which felt a lot like basic income, and that's what's made me so passionate about the subject since then. I'm not going to go into detail about that now, but maybe that's something which we can talk about later on. So to start off, I'm going to give, to sort of reiterate the sort of a basic definition of what I mean by basic income, or what universal basic income or unconditional basic income gets referred to. So this is what Philippe Van Perez terms as basic income: an income paid unconditionally to individuals, regardless of their family or household relationships, regardless of other incomes, and regardless of any past, present, or future employment status. I think it's like, yeah, this captures the idea for me really well. Philippe is a long-standing advocate for basic income and is a member of BN, which is the Basic Income Earth Network. And I'm going to go through the 5 criteria of what BN term as a true basic income. So those are that it should be paid periodically. This would be either every week or every month. It's really important, but it's not a one-off cash payment or a lump sum. It's sort of a really important aspect of basic income is it's a sort of a steady amount of money which comes periodically. Another point is that it would be a cash payment. So it should be an appropriate medium of exchange, allowing those who receive it to decide what they spend it on. So it shouldn't be, therefore, any kind of something something you can pay for as a subsidy. So it's, yeah, sorry, I'm getting jumbled over my words here. So it's not something you'd receive in kind. So it wouldn't be a food subsidy or other services, and it wouldn't be vouchers dedicated to a specific use. So it's really important that the individuals who receive it actually have power over what they spend it on. Another aspect is it should be paid to individuals. So it wouldn't be a benefit or a payment which households or family units would receive. An important aspect of this is that there can be inequality within households. So actually by paying it to individuals empowers them more. And then the fourth aspect is it would be universal. So paid to everyone without any kinds of mean testing. And then finally, it would be unconditional. So paid with no requirements to work or needing to demonstrate the willingness to work or any other conditionalities. It's important to note at this point, a lot of things which get called basic income in the press don't actually fulfill all of the above criteria. They might tick several of the boxes, usually, but they're periodic. It's a cash transfer when it goes to individuals, but quite often there's some kind of conditionality or means testing or targeting involved. For a really true basic income, everyone in the community or everyone in society would receive exactly the same amount, or depending on their age. Okay. So hopefully that sort of gives you sort of a flavour for what basic income is and what it could be. It's a strange policy in some ways because it gathers a lot of support from people on both the left and the right of the political spectrum. This is often because those people might have different objectives for the policy or different goals which they want to achieve. Often basic income gets reviewed as a kind of a utopian idea. So it would be a means to redistribute wealth, reduce inequality, and increase security for everyone in society. Sometimes it's sort of proposed as a way of simplifying the welfare system, sort of reducing bureaucracy and means testing, making it moving kind of like the back end elements which might make it more efficient. Others see it as a way of shrinking the state. So by giving citizens a basic income, it means that the government would be able to reduce spending on public services. So leaving these up to the free market or private businesses to provide services. And in that way, there is a real fear that basic income could be used as a tool to dismantle or remove some welfare provision or all welfare provision. In this case, basic income would effectively be seen as giving tokens to citizens that they could then trade in for things like education, healthcare, and other services. And it's important to note at this point that this is not an interpretation that I would advocate for. For me, basic income should be part of a strong welfare system, either as a way of strengthening the welfare systems which are already in place or reforming them and making them more efficient. Okay. So sometimes basic income is presented as free money or money for nothing, which I think is quite disingenuous and is often a sort of a deliberate ploy to try and discredit the idea. People who say these kinds of things are people who would say that there's no such thing as a free lunch. But there has to be some kind of conditionality or reciprocity to any kind of money transactions. But Joy from the German organization Mein Grundeinkommen, which is my basic income, he feels that basic income could be seen as a free breakfast, which would then give you the nourishment and enable you to go out to earn your lunch or earn your dinner or any other things which you might need or want. Personally, I view basic income as a way of investing in society. And it would also be a way of rewarding all of the unpaid labor that already takes place, but which we, as a society, rely on it to function. Okay, so that's kind of a sort of a cursory introduction to what basic income is and sort of some of the different versions of it and why people support it. I'm going to explore specific arguments for and against basic income in a moment. But before I do that, I want to talk about some of the participatory art projects I've been working on, which I've been using to communicate the idea of basic income to members of the public, and sort of why I've been using this method. Okay, so from my experience, talking to people about basic income for the first time can be quite difficult, especially if you've approached them unsolicited. Describing what it is, who would receive it, how it would be funded, you know, all these kind of things can sound quite bureaucratic, and become overcomplicated very quickly. If you're talking to someone and they raise an ideological objection, for example, why should we give free money to people who don't deserve it? This can be very difficult to move past with any arguments which you sort of propose to sort of counter it. And even if someone is generally supportive of basic income in principle, they might sort of think that it's a utopian idea and so therefore disregard it as impossible to achieve. Now, in these cases, you know, if the conversation ends up like this, it can be quite difficult to move beyond sort of a binary win or lose debate. And so any nuance in your arguments kind of gets lost quite quickly. You know, it can quite easily turn into a shouting match. You know, I find that once someone's formed an opinion on the subject, it's very difficult to change their mind, no matter how much evidence you have. You know, in this case, statistics and any kind of data you have might just seem abstract and unconvincing compared to people's sort of personal stories and lived experiences. So instead of trying to convince someone that basic income is a good idea, I believe it's much better to let them make up their own decision. And to do this, let's see, I try to connect the idea of basic income to their own lives and their own lived experiences. And this is where art can play a role. So this is an image from my exhibition called Between Eating and Sleeping, which took place in an empty shop unit on a busy high street in England. It's also taken place in other spaces, like I've done it in a library and an indoor market, and you know, I've tried to put it in non-art spaces as much as possible, so it reaches a wider audience and you have a more dynamic kind of conversation, as dynamic as possible. But the question poses the three questions that I stated at the start of the presentation. So just as a recap, those are: what did you want to be when you were growing up? What gets you out of bed in the morning? And what would you do if you had a year off? So for the duration of the exhibition, I was painting the questions directly onto the walls of the gallery space, or the walls of the shop space, and was clearly visible from people walking by. I tried to encourage them to come in and then create a space for discussion where people could approach me instead of me stopping them in the street with a clipboard and a sort of a survey. So the three questions are designed to place the reader in the past, the present, and a speculative future. And so, not all of the conversations I had were about basic income. The exhibition sort of created a space which allowed me as an advocate to listen to people's responses and to learn from them, just about their general lives, but also what other concerns they had, which might not necessarily be connected to basic income, but could sort of factor into problems or solutions with implementing it. But from talking to people, I found that their explanations to the three questions, or sort of why they'd answered the way they had, were often much more revealing than their initial responses. But for the first two questions, most people had initial, or sort of a sort of not a learned response, but something which they had directly to hand. So, for example, what did you want to be when you were growing up? Most people would say space or dinosaurs. So there are a lot of unfulfilled astronauts out there. And then for what gets you out of bed in the morning, the answers were usually pragmatic. This is sort of needing the toilet or needing something to eat, sort of coffee, breakfast, sandwiches, etc. And surprisingly, or not surprisingly, it's very few people said that work was the reason for getting out of bed. There were more important things for them. So these were usually looking after children or parents, or feeding their pets. Jobs usually took sort of second or third place in their list of priorities. But the response to the final question, what did you want to be when you were, what would you do if you had a year off, were sort of the most interesting and most revealing. For a lot of people, meant they would have to use their imagination. The prospect of a year off is something which a lot of people don't usually and a lot of them would want some kind of clarification to, what do I mean by a year off? Would it be paid and unpaid? Could they take time off from their family or their normal daily lives? Would it have to be something which, fixed in reality? And I always said it was up to them. Now, once I'd had a conversation with someone, and got to sort of understand a little bit more about them and what sort of gave their life meaning and what their sort of their value systems were, I was able then to introduce the idea of basic income and how that might fit to their own lived experiences. So one example was so she was a part-time researcher, so she worked at a university 3 days a week. But outside of this time, she was also a mother of two. She was a drummer in a heavy metal band, and she grew prize-winning leeks on her allotment. And although she really enjoyed her job as a researcher, she said that it was the things which she did outside of that, outside of her job, which gave her life meaning. And if she was, if she was able to take more time off, to sort of give more time to these other activities, she would. And she also sort of reflected that the research job actually funded the other things which she would do outside of that. So, looking after children was expensive. All these kind of things. There was no sort of profit incentive behind those other things, but those were the things which got her up every day, and what she looked forward to. Okay, so I missed the last slide. I'll leave this for a second just while let's see, the next stage is I'll talk about some of the reasons or some of the arguments I would pose for basic income, sort of in these conversations which I was having with people. And these arguments are loosely based on a presentation or some of the key points from Guy Standing's presentation to the UN on a panel on how to tackle extreme poverty. So he relates basic income to social justice. He states that the wealth and income of all of us has more to do with the endeavors and achievements of the generations before us than our own activities. He says that if you accept private wealth and inheritance, then you should also allow for a social inheritance. And basic income would be a way of sharing the wealth that we have collectively created by all of us, and this would be for the benefit of everyone in society, not just those who have procured and acquired wealth. Then there's ecological justice. So he states that workers don't profit from production, but they are the ones who are most likely to be affected by the negative impacts of industries, for example, pollution. These effects are disproportionately felt by the poor, especially in the global south. And so to rectify this, the business owners who profit from extractive industries should pay more in tax to reduce the negative impacts of their industries, and or as a way of funding a basic income, which would then be distributed to all the workers and everyone else. The third argument is the emancipatory effect that basic income has. For me, this is the strongest reason for basic income. So he says that a basic income at any level creates a sense of freedom, and it gives you the ability to say no. So you can say no to exploitative work and no to exploitative relationships. And you're able to go forward with an equal status to others. Standing states that those who receive a basic income, that the emancipatory effects far outweigh any financial gains which they get. And so there's also the basic security that basic income would bring. Millions of people all over the world are being plunged into chronic insecurity, and the COVID-19 pandemic has just increased the situation. A key finding from lots of basic income trials is that there's usually a mass or a large reduction in levels of stress and anxiety in participants, and the security that the basic income provides gives them a mental calm and allows them to make decisions in long-term and strategic senses. So not just constantly firefighting. Also, evidence from trials shows that basic income bestows dignity with financial autonomy. And so by trusting adults with more control over the use of their time, together with providing the financial security, this empowers them and increases their life choices. And finally, a basic income would also help us to redefine what we mean by work by uncoupling it from income. Currently, there is a lot of work that is not recognized or rewarded by labor markets. This includes care work, community work, artistic and ecological work. Effectively, the things which give people their meaning in life. It's kind of, and this is especially what I found from the conversations which I had with people during my exhibitions. At the moment, a majority of domestic and care work is done by women. And I'm not saying that basic income would solve this gender imbalance, but evidence from trials has shown that it would be the first step in addressing this issue. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the most common sort of arguments against basic income, and this is largely based on the conversations I was having with people. Why should we give basic income? Oh, sorry, let's see. Right, yeah, so basic income would be a disincentivized work. It would make everyone lazy and we'd all quit our jobs. So from my experience, if you ask people if they would stop working if they received the basic income, most of them say no, of course not. I have a strong work ethic. But the same people would say, oh, but everyone else would become lazy and wouldn't work at all because that's the way they are. And I think this is, this comes down to sort of a lack of trust in others. And, a lot of this might just stem from the inequalities which are already perceived in society and any sort of real or perceived injustices which we already have. Basic income would mean that many people could leave their jobs, but this would probably be because they're exploitative jobs or that they're, not very, they don't enjoy the work. It would give people the security to go on and find work they did find more meaningful or more valuable. An example, a real life example of this is that people who win the lottery are almost universally continue to work, but most of them don't continue in the same jobs that they previously had. Because they've got the financial security of their lottery winnings, they're able to go on and do work which they actually care about instead, change career choices and things like that. Let's see, so evidence from basic income studies have shown that there is actually an increase and not a decrease in work, particularly when secondary activities are included in that. So people have used their cash transfers to set up small income generating businesses and are able to invest in equipment such as sewing machines and tools. The second point is, why should we give money to rich people who don't need it? Well, rich people are also members of society, so therefore they should receive the basic income like everyone else. And it's actually cheaper and fairer to give everyone the basic income money instead of doing means testing. Means testing is actually really expensive, and targeting means that a lot of people get excluded or fall through the net. The other point here is that the rich would have to pay their basic income back in tax immediately. But to do this effectively, we would need more progressive tax systems which close loopholes and would stop tax evasion. A second point on this is that the rich may not always receive their high salaries. What happens if they have a car accident and they can no longer play football? Because they've got a basic income, they would have the same security as everyone else. And because of this, a universal basic income wouldn't be seen as a handout to the poor. It would just be seen as a basic right. and this would build solidarity, much like the NHS does in the UK. And this can particularly be seen now, sort of during the COVID pandemic. It's interesting to me that the very same critics who say that if you give free money to people, that will disincentivize work, are often also the advocates for people, advocates for awarding huge salaries to CEOs and business leaders. Now, I've never heard the argument that if you pay a CEO too much money, they won't work as hard. So why would it go the other way around? Okay, there is a real concern around inflation. Some argue that the price of goods would go up and landlords would hike their rents, so any basic income which we receive would be absorbed through this. Again, it's worth pointing out that basic income isn't a silver bullet. Other policies would be needed to support it and to stop profiteering in this way. But evidence shows that when people on a modest income have more money in their pockets, they invest it in the local economy, which benefits local businesses and helps services, and it could even evidence has shown that it would reduce costs in local goods and services. Okay, another big issue that people have is they say that it would just cost too much money. It would just be so expensive, but it would just cripple the economy, or the government wouldn't have enough money to pay for it. So it's worth agreeing that yes, basic income would be expensive, but it's also expensive not implementing it. At the moment, we already spend vast sums of money on alleviating the effects of poverty, and basic income would reduce these effects by addressing the root cause, one of which is income equality. And ultimately, we would probably have to raise taxes to raise the money for basic income. But I think this is a price worth paying for a fairer and healthier society. As the American Democrat, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez asks, why do we only have empty pockets when it comes to the morally right things to do? She states that when it comes to funding tax cuts for the rich or unlimited war, there always seems to be money available. But this is not the case for projects like renewable energy to tackle climate change or basic income to reduce poverty. So these are some of the main criticisms which I come across and some of the counter arguments for basic income. I'm sure people will have more concerns and questions, and we can talk about these more in the Q&A. Okay, so I'm going to finish now with another example of one of my art projects, which is called Paint by Numbers, and it poses this central question: which currency is more valuable, time or money? And again, it's got this box asking why, because again, I find that the people's explanations why are usually more interesting or more revealing than the actual initial response. From here, the project poses a series of provocations that cover connecting themes, including understandings of wealth, labor, basic income, and if free time should be seen as a human right. And the project, again, is sort of set up to start conversations about how we value time and question what impact money has on our lives. And it's taken the form of this beer mat, which I've sort of distributed in pubs and bars. It's also been an exhibition, and it comes in the form of this booklet as well, which has all the different sort of flow diagram questions and charts and things. And again, it's this sort of idea of sort of unpicking sort of maybe what we perceive notions or value judgments which we might have. I will put in the chat a link to the project's website where you can download a PDF version of this booklet. Okay, but yeah, I'll do that in the questions part. So again, the idea of this project is to help us rethink our relationship to work and how basic income might sort of change that. Okay, so I'll end on there. So thank you very much for listening. I haven't gone too heavily into the evidence of from pilots of basic income because I'm sure Sarath will address a lot of this in his talk. And for me, the projects and basic income trials that he's been involved with have been a real inspiration for me in my research. So I'm really interested and really excited to see what he has to say. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Toby, for this insightful presentation. And I'll just have, we'll go through 2 to 3 questions, and we'll also have a conversation, a response from Sarath in this Q&A between 3 of us. So in my reading, I've come across several terminologies for basic income. So there is universal beautiful income, basic income, citizens basic income guarantee, basic income stipend, universal demogram. And Professor Guy Standing says that it is an economic right or a permanent citizenship right with no conditions to be paid by the state to every citizen as a basic social security. Now, as an artist involved with research in this area, you mentioned in your February talk in Pune that about an artist residency, which felt like basic income. And that sort of led you to the kind of work that you're doing today. So could you throw light on that? Because it is also about how you experienced a personal form of basic income to be able to, come into this research.
Yeah. So the residency which I did, it was in 2015, and it started off as a 12-month live-work residency. So this is different to the way that normal artist residencies work. Usually you would go to, it's usually sort of like a white middle-class man like me, goes to a deprived area and stays there for maybe a week to a month, and we'll do some workshops with children or different groups, and then they might make a mural or sort of a sculpture or a project, and then they disappear and never go back to that area again.
Sorry to cut you, Toby. I can't see you. I think your video is off. Or...
really? Okay, it should be on. I think it. Yeah. Can you see me now?
No, I can't hear you. I can't see.
Amrita, it's on. It might be your settings on your end, but we're able to see him.
Oh, okay. He was here all this time. Anyway, please continue.
Okay. So the art organization who instigated the residency said, how can we make a different version of this? And the model they came up with is that the residency was to live in a house in this area and commit to living there for 1 year. We ended up staying for 2.5 years because I did the residency with a friend of mine. With the house, we also had a small stipend which would cover all our rent and our bills, and give us sort of pocket money at the end where we could, so we could live a frugal life. It wasn't a glamorous life, but we were also able to do other projects and earn more money on top of that if we needed or wanted to. And it came with the condition that we basically would live there and commit to living there, sort of spending at least 3 days a week, but we ended up living there full time. And there was some expectation that we'd do art projects in the community, but as a way of sort of getting to know people, we did a lot of volunteer work. Because again, we didn't have to rely on earning money. It meant that we had a lot more time and freedom to do that, which meant that we ended up going to a lot of community meetings, finding out who our local councillors and who our local politicians were. And through doing that, we were able to find out who the good ones, who were very engaged in the area and did a lot of work in the area, and meet the ones who would only show up at election time and stuff like that. So for me, it was a really emancipatory experience because it was the first time that I didn't have to worry about earning money, and I could really invest in the area I was living in. I mean, quite often, my experience of living in places, you go to work, go to the supermarket, and then go home. And I mean, on my street in Newcastle, I know a few of my neighbours, and I've lived here for eight years now. And after 6 months living in Leeds on the residency, I knew more people. I nearly knew the whole street, and after 6 months. And that was through doing a lot of community engagement work, but also just from being around more and finding out who people were and having the time to do that, really. So during the residency, we did a lot of projects which might not look like art, but they definitely fed into the kind of work which we were making. So things like doing, just like doing litter picks, or canvassing for different politicians, or just doing voluntary work like working on community gardens and things like that. Yeah, I think I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there. I don't know if I've answered the question the way that I initially would have wanted to, but hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, I guess for me, just the not having to worry about earning money meant that I could spend a lot more time sort of investing in myself, but also in the area I lived. And I think that kind of ripple effect was something which would happen with basic income. Just a lot of the people I speak to who don't vote, or feel that there's no point in voting or in political sort of things, just because they feel that they don't have time or energy to find out who the people who they're voting for are, or that they feel that there's no point doing it because we can't actually hold these people accountable. Or that another example, they say, oh, they're all crooks, or that kind of thing. I think if we had more time to hold people to account, find out why they're making certain political decisions, I think that would be a really valuable thing, which basically would allow people to do.
Thank you. There are a few other things that I think we can take up in the Q&A. And I was wondering whether Sarath had a response to Toby's presentation, in the European context, and basically how basic income redefines the notion of work. Sarath, would you want to respond to Toby? Or
yeah, thank you, Amrita. Thank you, and Toby, thank you for a wonderful presentation. You really laid out everything that is there about the arguments about what exactly basic income means. Now, I think you're pointing towards the whole notion of how we view ourselves. When you have a sense of security, psychological security, I think we are opening out the possibility that the way in which we view our life, the way in which we spend our time would completely, there will be a revolutionary change in that. And I think that's a very interesting line to continue, because today we are prisoners of our current economy, our current securities, insecurities, blah, blah, blah. One question I have is, I really believe, I think that's what emancipation means. I think today we also don't have the mind space to think of emancipation for the middle class. We only talk of the emancipation for the enslaved classes, but even the middle class badly needs emancipation today. Now, what is that kind of, how would that look like? The question I have in my mind when you were making the presentation was that consumption has become a kind of, what should I say, a kind of a pathology of our current society. So when you are emancipated, when you are relatively more secure because of assured, secure income, what would happen to consumption? What would happen to this fetish for consumption?
Well, I think we can kind of see that a little bit in the current situation with, now that there's a lockdown, and we're not, like some people say to me at the moment, oh, this is, so I guess a lot of the writing I've been doing is about what a post-work society would be like. I mean, if we didn't have to go to work, and again, this is an argument which people sort of say, if we had basic income, that would mean that no one would go to work, and that's how we get all of our dignity and status in life and all these kinds of things. But again, it's that whole system where if you earn this much money, then you have to have this kind of car which goes with your status. You have to have all these other kind of things which go along with it, and that kind of builds up and builds up to the point where, yeah, that like we are the things which we buy, or the lifestyles which we have. Or I think having a basic income and removing the need to work as much. I mean, again, this whole idea that we would all stop working, I think, is ridiculous, because we all work all of the time. It's just, but it's not, it might not be a taxable wage. So even cooking and cleaning, looking after each other, buying groceries for the neighbor who can't go out because of COVID or whatever. All these kinds of things, show us actually what the important things in life and what gives us meaning. And I think, it would be a revolutionary thing. It would be very difficult for a lot of people as well, because we have so much invested in our identities, around the things which we consume and the way that we live our lifestyles. So I think, for a lot of people, it would be potentially quite a painful shift or radical shift, having to reestablish the way they think about themselves and the way they think about creating meaning in their lives. But I think a key thing would be the reduction in consumption. Not needing to have to buy as much stuff anymore. And then, I guess just for an example, I guess a lot of things like people I speak to who work really busy jobs, and they get up early, they put on their work clothes and they go to work, and then they buy a sandwich at lunchtime because they don't have enough time to make their own packed lunch or something like this. And it's, if you rack up how much money they're spending on these expensive sandwiches, which are covered in packaging, which is really bad for the environment and all these kinds of things as well. If you reduced that by giving them more time to, maybe they could work remotely using Zoom to go to work and all this kind of stuff. But maybe that would have, it would have a massive impact on the level of consumption that people had, and they would have to, they would have to rejig their lives. And I think it would be painful for some people, but it would be really beneficial.
Thank you for the question, Sarath, and thank you, Toby. We'll go on to the next step of this session. I'd like to invite Sarath Davala to begin his presentation. I'll quickly introduce him. Sarath Davala is a sociologist and a basic income advocate. He's currently the Vice President of Basic Income India Network, Basic Income Earth Network, London, and coordinator of India Network of Basic Income that advocates for basic income in the Indian context. He will present results from pilot studies on this policy that were carried out by SEWA and UNICEF in Madhya Pradesh, India between 2010 to 13, and speak on the recent proposal on emergency basic income, EBI, for the informal sector that the INBI Foundation has presented to the central government. Sarath, I'd like to invite you.
Thank you. Thank you, Amrita. Thank you, friends. Thank you, CASP and TIFA, for giving me this opportunity to share my experiences and views about basic income. I have not planned to do any academic presentation here because I think the academic part is already there in the public domain. And I would rather share with you my own journey with basic income, and then Indian situation, why it is important in the Indian context, and the pilot study we did, and what have been the takeaways of the pilot study, and then come to the current COVID situation and all that we have been doing in that context. I think I think Toby has put it very clearly about the 5 parts, 5 aspects of what a basic income constitutes. I think the most important part of that is the unconditional part. And that's also the most difficult part for people to digest. Somehow, unconditional seems okay. Maybe Amrita, can you just go to the mute? You're on mute, yeah. Okay, there's no sound. Unconditional is very difficult for people to digest because unconditional means it's allowed probably within the private space, but it's not allowed. It's not seen as something that is useful in the public square. In public square, everything has to be transactional, reciprocity has to be there, that you get paid for what you do. You don't work and you don't get paid. So when you say that you give everybody an unconditional basic income, that seems to be the most difficult, because in the public square, in the public policy, we don't have anything similar which has at its core the unconditional part. Now we have many programs that are universal. We have many programs that are individual. We have many programs of cash transfers. The third point, we have many examples of a monthly payment or a periodic payment. So our effort has been to articulate more and more about why we need a better society, and to build that better society, it's necessary to introduce unconditionality. That is the crux of the entire idea of universal unconditional basic income. I'd like to just add one point, as Toby has already pointed out, that universal because we don't want to stigmatize the welfare giving. So when somebody is receiving welfare, that person is stigmatized and seen as somebody as some kind of a disability. Either it is a social disability or a physical disability or a temporary disability like pregnancy, unemployment, or anything, things like that. So the so-called welfare is supposed to be for those exceptions. But today we are actually asking that remove the stigma and make this basic income universal. Now, coming to the Indian context, why is the idea being discussed? Why has it become why is it necessary that we are discussing? Now, let's start with the way government has started. It's the government introduced. I mean, we have been talking about this since 2013 when we were doing our study, and 2014 we published a report of the pilot study in Madhya Pradesh. Now 2017 government actually, the central government tabled a report, economic survey in which universal basic income was one important chapter. Why is government interested in it? Government is not interested in it from the point of view of social justice. Government is more interested in universal basic income from the point of view of so-called administrative efficiency or fiscal as a measure, or to save some of the subsidy money that is going waste. I'll give you a small example. All of you know that there was the cooking gas. They changed the system. Earlier, the cooking gas, that LPG, they were subsidizing the oil companies. And they said they asked the oil companies to keep the price level at a certain point, and then said whatever is required, that subsidy the government was giving the oil companies. But then I think about 10 years ago, this changed this policy, and then brought in, there are more players in the market. And then they said, oil companies can price whatever. We are going to give this subsidy directly to the consumers, to the citizens. So LPG, all of you know, is a universal program, and every Indian citizen is entitled to a certain number of LPG cooking gas. Now, what happened was that they asked that everybody should have a bank account, and then they should also integrate with the LPG registration, blah, 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 and all that happened. And then they realized that they have saved something like 15,000 crores or 20,000 crores. It's a huge amount of money they saw. And then the Prime Minister also went out and said that please give up your subsidy. So apparently about 1 million people have given up, or even 10 million people have given up. Sorry, I don't remember the figures. The point is that became a kind of incentive for the government, and said that let's do DBT, direct benefit transfer, to the majority of the subsidies that we are doing. And they're all, in any case, they're all inefficient. And one of the biggest subsidy was the PDS system, that is public distribution system, the ration shop. You give subsidized food grains to the at one point of time it was universal, but it progressively became much more targeted. At the moment, the National Food Security Act says that it should be given to about 66% in the urban areas and 75% of the population in the rural areas. So I think government, that is where the government is coming from. And Where we have been coming from, the pilot was actually initiated by Self-Employed Women's Association, which is a women's trade union. They they said that the allocations are increasing for the poor, and within the poverty alleviation discussion, and but then the delivery is so poor. Let's experiment with direct cash transfers to the poor. This is still part of the poverty alleviation discourse and not yet into the emancipatory discourse that Toby is talking about. So in India, it's a global idea, but in India, it has gotten stitched into the poverty alleviation discourse that through universal basic income can we alleviate poverty. Okay. Then the whole other questions will come. Why should then be universal? All those questions we can come into. Now, I wanted to that our delivery system is really inefficient. We accept that the public distribution system, there are likely to be 30% to 40% leakages. South Indian states may be better than the North Indian states. North Indian states, the leakages are huge and heavy. That's one. Leakages are. The second point is that we apparently, this is from a government document, we saw that India spends about 3 rupees to deliver 1 rupee welfare. Okay, so which means that you need to allocate 4 rupees. Then the government started doing it math and say, okay, if we are allocating 4 rupees and then the last man is getting not even 1 rupee that is meant to him, but he is getting only 60 paise. Then he said that, okay, let's do away with this huge bureaucracy and then try to redo the math. So that's how government is interested in the but I think as a union, SEVA was interested, and as a network, INBI was interested essentially on the emancipatory. If you look at the study, that is why the study was done. And in the Indian context, I'm sure all of you know that it's a very small percentage of people are actually to have secure jobs. Just about 5 to 6% of the people, out of which the bulk are in the government and in the private sector. The rest are in private sector. So the 94% of the working population, which is about 500 million plus, is actually without a kind of a proper, without any job security. First of all, uncertain employment. Many are self-employed, including farmers. Now, what you find is that there's a huge section of the population. In fact, the people who have job security and good social security are an exception in this country. In a country like this, I think it's very important to talk about universal unconditional basic income, because there are huge problems with targeting. We can go into it if there are questions, but I think this is widely discussed that when you do targeting, targeting is always arbitrary. There can't be a sacred and a scientific way of targeting who deserves and who doesn't deserve. At the end of the day, basic income doesn't replace work, as Toby has already pointed out. It is a kind of a ground on which it doesn't even replace capitalism. I think one is asking for a capitalism where you don't start from zero. A basic income is a solid ground on which you stand and then participate in the labor market and build one's own life, because human flourishing is at the end of the day our goal. Now, quickly, I will run through the main takeaways of this research project we did, an experiment we did in Madhya Pradesh. Now, we covered about 6,000, because basic income is always individual, 6,000 individuals in 9 villages. In each village, we gave to the population of the village, including the rich. Because universal is also, apart from removing the stigma, it also creates a sense of solidarity. It invokes the citizenry and it's rather than the rich and the poor. Now, the most important takeaways I'll focus on and then move on to the next part of this presentation. Now, when you gave unconditional, first of all, I think it was it's an incredible thing. It is an unbelievable. People would not believe. In fact, the rich people in the village said that this is a kind of a way of taking our signatures and then robbing our land, and this is some kind of a fraud. And initially, when our researchers went to the villages, I think they called the police, and all kinds of things happened, because this is something, why would anybody give anybody free money, so-called free money? Now, I think Toby has really brought out all the prejudices that are there, all the arguments against basic income. In fact, I think the study, which is there in the form of a book, in the form of report, and in the form of several kinds of writings of the Indian pilot study, and what it basically, what the findings say. One is that it breaks all these myths. It shatters all these myths. In fact, people start working more when you give them an unconditional basic income. And farmers, if you, one of the most important finding in the study was that usually in villages, people with small piece patches of land, they're cultivators, and also they are also wage laborers. So at the beginning of the study, for example, 60% said that I'm a wage laborer primarily, and cultivator 40% of the time. 40% said that I'm a primarily, which means that the question is about on what kind of work you spend majority of your time. By the end of the study, in the second, it was already a second cycle. I mean, we gave money for 18 months. It was completely reversed, which means that these small farmers who had a patch of land and working as wage laborers began to spend more time on their own cultivation. That is a land which may not have been, they may not be cultivating. Suddenly they start spending more time and they cultivate. So on the whole, in the village, you find that the agricultural production has improved, number one. Number two, the borrowing behavior. You know, um, poverty means that a life of borrowing. You continuously borrow because you can't service, your income is not sufficient to meet your expenditure, your needs. So you continuously keep borrowing. When you have the harvest, you repay the money and again borrow for the next sowing season. So what happened was, the money we gave was not a very big amount of money, but as a family, when they pool and over period of 2-3 months, and it becomes a reasonable sum to invest into their agriculture. So what happens was that people shifted from exploitative sources of borrowing to the softer sources of borrowing. Maybe if there is a wedding, they will borrow nonetheless from the money lender. But then for small borrowings, they started going to their neighbors, and because there is a credit worthiness, because everybody is getting money, every month they get the money. So you can always say that next month when I get my money, I will give you. And usually farmers and wage laborers in the villages, they either get their weekly wage or they get paid annually. They get their harvest annually. If they are working for a landlord, so getting a regular monthly income is something they're not familiar with. So this that kind of shift has happened. And even within the employment options that they have, they started moving from the exploitative and the harsher forms of employment to better forms of employment. Those you can find in the study. If you see the book, the findings, you can very clearly see those small little shifts that happen. And one important thing that happened in all the 9 villages where we experimented was the livestock has really increased by 40 to 50%. And in some villages, it has gone, particularly tribal villages where there is a forest around their village. You have 100% increase of the livestock, because for people in the village, in these kinds of villages, livestock is a kind of an immediate thing that comes to their mind when they have a little money. That it is like insurance. It's like their money in the bank. You know, they can always sell a goat. They can always sell if they are in urgent need. So these are, lastly, let me put it this way, that even in terms of food consumption, there were shifts. There was slightly improvement in the quality of the food they ate, because when you have cash in hand, you buy that little extra oil, or which you will otherwise not buy, or that little extra um, maybe some eggs for children, and maybe some vegetables, and so on and so forth. So the findings of this study have been really encouraging, and I'm a social anthropologist, so we were doing the qualitative part of the study, and we had also statisticians. So we were literally staying in the villages. For me personally, it has been a life-changing 1 or 2 years that we spent in these villages, that you really see that this kind of unconditional income coming to people, it does something to them in terms of the way they view themselves, in terms of the way they make their choices. So in fact, my major conviction to be a basic income advocate comes from my experiences and watching myself in those villages, what actually happens when you do this. That's where my conviction comes from, and ever since I've been a basic income advocate. I'm not sure how I'm doing with time, but there is the last aspect of the emergency basic income. Can somebody let me know how am I doing with time? Amrita?
About 5 minutes.
Okay, great. So, okay, let's come to, I mean, we have been advocating, we are India Network for Basic Income, and then we do research, and also different forms we disseminate what we find in our research, and also make arguments. Now, given the COVID times, I think this is a presentation in itself. Like I said, that barring the 6% of the working population, uh, the rest of the people are really, when the economy comes to a grinding halt, you realize that if you don't have if you don't have work, you don't have income. And majority of them, majority of the urban poor are really without work, without income, and in a desperate situation. So, I mean, as I said earlier, I don't know, maybe I did not say here, that as a charity organization, we put into relief work because we found the situation around us extremely, and particularly we are now advocacy on migrant workers. In where I am based, Hyderabad, we have about 2 million migrant workers. I think that should be the case in the rest of the metropolises as well. So what two things that we have done, one is that I think earlier, if you remember, some of you will remember that there used to be a discussion about food or cash. This was a discussion when the right to food was a movement was going on, and then the act was not yet there. Now, if it's not today, it's not the case. I think we are not talking about food or cash, but we are talking about the state actually provisioning food and cash, because we have a tendency to look at poverty as just open hungry mouths, which is actually a very serious misreading of poverty itself. Poverty means many things. I mean, if the government is giving rice, and in certain situations giving cash, but what we are saying is that INBI has made a proposal to the government based on the World Bank measurement of poverty line, and said that this is the amount of money, 4260 for every adult for a period of 6 months. That is when it. Now, I think finally government announced just a one-time grant of 500 rupees. I think that doesn't help. So the civil society, CSR, everybody has to now pitch in to ensure that we really meet the crisis, and ensure that some amount of money also reaches people. Because if you have to buy medicine, you can't eat rice. If you have to buy milk for your child, in fact, we have begun to supply milk powder to some of the local hospitals where the quarantine mothers are there and the children are there. So that's the kind of situation we have. And now we have, and then one of the main problems we are facing, government is facing, so that we don't have documentation. All the migrant workers, we don't have any documentation, in the sense that they have to register themselves afresh. Now, how do they register themselves? Do they have an Aadhaar card? Do they have this card? Do they have that card? And you get entangled in this, and the supply doesn't reach. So what we wanted to do a demonstration with the government is that we had partnering with the post office and said that, like the good old money order, you please, gave the money to the post office and asked them to identify people with name and mobile number, go to these locations. We have 30 migrant workers, 100 migrant workers here. Please go and deliver this cash individually. So these are various experiments at the moment we are doing. I think I'm also running out of time. In the Q&A, if you have questions, you can also reach out to me and raise questions through CASP, or you can write to me. I will end there. I think there are many other things I would have loved to say, but then let's leave it to the Q&A session. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarath, for raising such important and challenging questions, particularly the fact that the rate for the amount for EBI is 4,000 something rupees, but what goes to the to people is, and allocated by the government, is about 500 rupees now, which is very, very minimal. Now, I just had one question before we open it out to the audience. Just give me a moment. Now, I just have a question is, without repairing in the current welfare programs, government must reconsider the relationship between paid labor, unpaid work, and how basic income needs are met. Where will this money come from? I mean, there are welfare schemes. There will be some allocation. Will there be donations by the corporate sector? How is this emergency basic income imagined, and where will the money come from? I just had this basic question, and we can go to the other questions.
Yeah, basically we try to set a norm. We try to set a principle also, that where the Indian poverty line is far too low. It doesn't actually represent the current situation at the ground level. So we have pitched it at the poverty line based of the World Bank. And then we said that each family should get at least around 10,000 rupees per month for a period of 6 months. Okay. Now, I think the money that goes to people comes back into the economy because they don't save and hoard. They purchase the bare necessities. And obviously, during this COVID times, you can't even say that they're going to waste the money. They will drink it away, or they will buy entertainment goods and all that. Nothing is possible. So they will spend the money, and the money will all come back as long as you ensure the supply side. Okay. But let the government say that, okay, this is the kind of a very high norm. We will give half of it. But let there be a principle that you can't do just an arbitrary amount and then say that we will give, and that may come, may not come. And then the state governments have to decide. Now the Telangana state government has announced 1,500 rupees for those who have who are part of the food security and who have the ration card. Now, people who don't have ration card, they'll have a different principle. Now, 1,500 includes, they said that it includes what the central government 500 also. So the point is, there is no principle there at all, where you can vary within the principle, but when there is no principle at all, it's all arbitrary. On what basis do you say 500 rupees? And on what basis you will say that I'll bail out Yes Bank with this amount of money? Because you go by the need of it. Whereas here, you don't want to go by the need. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I will, we have just 15 minutes for the Q&A, and so I will open it up to the audience. And Toby, in the course of the conversation, you can also respond. So I have, there is a question from Reinhard Huss, and he says, his question is that there is one unconditionality in the public space which most people seem to accept without any problems. If you want to change the system. So most people seem to accept the undeserved inheritance of huge amounts of wealth, which allows a few people to exercise power over society. As a public health teacher, I used to say, the best thing you can do for health is select the right parents. Why do people find it difficult to accept UBI? Why do people find it difficult to accept UBI but have no problem with inheritance? So that is one question from Reinhard about inheritance and basic income, and then the question of wealth between these two categories. Would you want to answer that? I can pull out some questions, other questions which may be of interest. Yes.
I completely agree with this. We have taken private inheritance as a fact of life, as if when the world was created, I think it was one part that was part of nature, as if it is a natural right. It is not. It is something we have created, and we have completely forgotten what public inheritance means. So I think it's high time we talk of public inheritance. And we are not saying that don't have, but why do we take private inheritance for granted and not talk of public inheritance? I think that is where we need to shift the discussion. Thank you so much, Reinhard, for that.
So I have another question from Anupam. He says that, are we only looking at buying power only when we consider economic security? How would UBI impact the GDP of a country, or of in the Indian context, if you would want to answer that?
Well, I think I'm not an economist, so I will not go into the technical part of it, but I'll go to the philosophical part of it, which when you go, which we are talking, we are actually asking for a complete the revenue that comes from the mines as a windfall revenue. It is not even something that is part of how, on what basis you're giving the contracts, on what basis you what is the, I mean, the whole accounting system of that is the problematic. I think once we get into that, we'll open all the registers, because I think that today data is a big issue. I think so the huge multinationals, the huge companies which use our data, and it's only they that profit from them. So why don't we talk about data dividends? That so I think we need to open all this. Only then we can't, otherwise we can't answer this question, where is the money going to come from? I think the kind of unnecessary projects that we have, which we can't afford, we should just do away with them. So that's my only immediate quick response.
Can you hear me? Toby, there's a question from Nikhil Purohit. He's keen on understanding how UBI would impact the value system of the arts, associated value system, and its tangible and intangible consumption. I mean, even the arts, the way it works is very informal in many ways. So would you like to address that?
I think it's really interesting, particularly when I guess a big problem with the arts is that there's a lot of money at the top, and a lot of the artists or people, you know, most artists I know are broke, and you know, it's only a few people who are earning a lot of money, but there might be sort of large public funded bodies and museums and galleries and things like this. So I think with you know, this is a difficult question to answer really, because it's like, how do we value art, and what other factors does it play in our lives? You know, quite often people might say that, you know, if we're looking at the really important things, when it's like food, shelter, and all these other kinds of things, and then art or music and stuff like that might come later on once we've sorted all these kinds of things out. But I think, you know, even like a situation like the lockdown shows us just how quickly we start to miss things like going to concerts, going to museums, or even just listening to music, and you know, how many of us rely on just our laptops for sort of filling the time and stuff like that. So I guess this is, you know, I'm probably not going to be able to do justice to the question which is being asked, but I think that a basic income would help us redefine the value, again, the same way it redefines our value in work and what it means to work. You know, arts and cultures will also be redefined. And I think that, you know, all of us, you know, do art or do things which could be creative, and it would give more time for people to explore these things. And it's just looking, you know, I guess when we frame the value in, you know, how much money it makes, or how much money someone's prepared to pay for this, or the entertainment value of something, I think is problematic for me personally. I think it depends on what we define as value. I mean, I know books have been written on just on value and art. So let me see. Yeah, so I don't know. I've sent Mikhail my email address, so I'll try and send him some more examples and things like that. But I think for a quick answer, I think if we can take money out of the equation of art and sort of to see it as something that we can all enjoy and it benefits all of our lives, I think if that the value in that is increased, then that would be a good thing. And I think UBI could allow that, or would at least start to make those things happen.
Question from you. I'm not able to see the name, but I'll come to that. So this question is, what runs in my head now is a paradox, when on one hand we talk about social solidarity through UBI, at the same time we have a discourse about privilege. Social minorities across the country do have certain subsidies at different kinds of relaxations, and rightly so. So how do we make UBI universal? So I think that's a paradox which was also in the beginning of your presentation. Sarath.
I mean, the arguments for universality is basically a sense of solidarity, that you see each other. It's like when you go for voting, you don't have class-based or caste-based queues. All of us stand in the same queue. So there is a sense of solidarity, that we are all together in our capacity as citizens. So you receive a basic income. It's like in Alaska, there is a system that from the oil, certain dividends are declared every year, and those dividends are given to individual citizens annually. You get that money, $5,000 check or $10,000 check, whatever. You get that money because you're a citizen, in your capacity as a citizen, not because you have work, not because you are disabled, or not because you're privileged, that you have shares in that company. So now, I actually didn't understand the paradox that you're expressing. That is the basic justification why it should be universal. Now, in the Indian context, I mean, how do you justify? I don't know if you're asking that question. How do you justify the rich people getting basic income? I don't know if this is your question. If you want to correct me, you can correct me. I think it is much easier, even administratively, to give everyone and then take it back from the rich who don't need it, the so-called who don't need it, who don't need cash. Now, or to disincentivize accepting basic income. So they can self-select themselves out of the system, so that they, if you take a basic income, you may not get blah, blah, blah and all that. Or you can also think of finding an exclusion criteria rather than looking for an inclusion criteria. You can find various methods of dealing with that. But then I think giving everybody has many advantages. I don't know if I've answered your question, but you can please write to me, and you can call me also.
Thank you, Sarath. And yes, her name is Leena Jain. So the question was from her. And so I think we are close to 6 o'clock, and there are many questions, and I think we will take it up through email. And what I would suggest is that what we plan, CASP and TIFA plan to do is send out a list of readings on universal basic income for everyone on who have joined our webinar here today. And also the questions that have come in, we can make it a common document, and there can be a give and take of responses, so that we also have a document of all the questions that have come in together. So Trishla, would you like to say a few words? So thank you, Sarath. Thank you, Toby. Thank you everyone who's participated and made this possible.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for organizing such a beautiful seminar.
Thank you, Amrita.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you also, Toby and Sarath. That was very, very insightful. I just quickly like to thank the backend team for making this all possible, Pratika and Shaunak from the TIFA team, and also the entire CASP team, Anupam, Nupur, Anuradha, Jinal, and sorry if I'm missing anyone else, but the entire CASP team for making this happen. And Toby, for round 2 all over again online. I'm really happy to see so many people participate and really be active and ask the questions. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but we will answer them. If you can email the participants directly, we will send you a list of the questions and also a recording of the webinar via email in the next few days. And hope you have a great evening. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the participants and all the speakers again. Virtual claps.
Thank you so much.
thank you. Thank you.